Here we are 1700 years after the incarnation of our Lord in a small Western Europe country, France. Though small geographically, it is a great protagonist of Christianity. As a monarchy, it is ruled by a king that acknowledges that he receives his power from God. One of the first world powers of the 18th century, France remains nevertheless a very traditional society, though the so-called Enlightenment philosophy is putting that system into question. It's in the Western lands, far from the capital city, Paris, that our story begins. A new episode in the history of God amongst men, not far from the city of Poitiers. Let's start in the small village of Coussay-les-Bois, counting 1,400 inhabitants in that time. On the 1st of March 1768, first day of the month of Saint Joseph, is born Pierre Coudrin in this house that belongs to his godmother. He is the second child of Abraham Coudrin and Marie Rion. Their house is adjacent. The room where the would-be founder of the Congregation of the Sacred Hearts came to life is now an oratory. The whole place currently serves as a small hermitage. We can see it's a modest place. His parents, wealthy farmers, led a simple and sober life. In this place, Pierre spends his early childhood with his two brothers and his sister. This love he shares as a son and a brother is wholly based upon the love of God. His mother, a very pious woman, teaches him to make a space for the Lord early on in his life. Pierre Coudrin's Christian life begins on the day he is born by his baptism in that church dedicated to a great saint, Saint Martin, that lived in the region and propagated monastic life in the Western world. Right next to the street, in the nave later transformed into a house by his sisters of the congregation, is the spot where the baptistry stood. In that baptistry was christened the future Marie-Joseph Coudrin, thus being incorporated to the body of Jesus Christ, that is the church, for which he shall spare no effort. It was approximately by that window. But it was rather in the parish church of Notre Dame a few streets away that daily prayer life used to occur. Little Pierre often accompanied his mother in the first years of his life to visit the Most Blessed Sacrament. His father also often prayed there, reciting every day the Psalms of Penance for his children. Isn't it here that Pierre Coudrin's calling sprang, if we give credit to that note the good mother sends him in 1803? It's between the age of 8 and 10 that your calling for the ecclesiastic state was entirely decided, and though maybe you don't recall, it is at that age that you consecrated yourself to the good Lord. It was one of those movements of fervor that aren't always followed by anything, but are nevertheless frequently taken into account by the good Lord. In that rural life, rooted in family and religion, Coudrinet, as he is called, flourishes. The example of his uncle kneeling upon hearing the sound of the consecration bell while plowing the fields, or of his mother in daily life, imprint his heart forever. It's a sanctity that has its origin in simplicity and daily activities. Aged 11, he is sent to study at his godfather's, his mother's brother, Abbot François Rion, in the small hamlet of Crémilly. Pierre Coudrin receives for the first time Jesus Christ in the consecrated host on the feast of the Assumption of Our Lady. Later on, his uncle moves a bit further to the parish of Saint-Pierre-de-Maillet, and the boy joins him there for the holidays. In that place, he meets Henri Hubert Fournet, future saint and founder of the Daughters of the Cross. These days leave a deep mark on Pierre Coudrin for his future mission. His uncle will die during the revolution of the terrible Pontons de Rochefort. When he is 13, Pierre continues his education in the college at Châtellerault, another important local town. What about Henriette Aymer? 100 kilometers from Poussey. Was born the year previous to Pierre, she who would be known as the Good Mother. It was on the 11th of 1767, in the heat of summer. Born in a family of low nobility, the Aymers, her parents own a small castle set amongst fields and meadows. She will live there happily the first years of her life. It is said that she was born in that room, in the center of the first floor. Nowadays, few things keep her memory vivid there, but the adjacent barn still shows her family's emblem. In that time, the building had a tower. As it was for Pierre Coudrin, faith naturally gives existence its rhythm, and the baby girl is promptly baptized. In that little corner of the parish church of Saint Georges de Noignet, Henriette receives the baptismal grace that is bound to flourish in her future calling. Unfortunately, her father dies when she is 11. The place where he is buried in Saint Georges de Noignet has become a park where nothing is left of the cemetery, apart from a sandstone cross where the lanterns to pray for the dead were set. Following the tragic loss, she and her mother settled in Poitiers. She is sent to receive quality education in the Holy Cross Abbey of Poitiers. She leaves her family for the nuns' boarding school. She acquires knowledge and various skills, but also an experience of the contemplative life that will not remain fruitless. Nothing remains, let alone a few ruins of that prestigious abbey founded in the 6th century by the Queen Sainte Radegonde. The French Revolution will not spare the place where she received First Communion. The zeal Henriette will have for that blessed sacrament and reparation for the crimes of the Revolution outdoes any type of revenge. Already in that time her good temper and practical intelligence are noticed. Here's a testimony given about her. Henriette is full of wit and manages everything she endeavors. She is generally loved by everyone, but in a special manner by Madame the Abbess. Given the fragile family situation, her mother encourages her to partake in society events. Young Henriette shines in the salons and other mundane happenings thanks to her wit and her musical talents. She somewhat gets carried away by the lavishness of that social condition and is quite self-conscious about her appearance. It is in that setting that the French Revolution will find her. From 1785 on, young Pierre Coudrin is also around Poitiers to study at the seminary in the Pinet Hotel. He is quite successful there and is rather concerned by other matters, family business and political troubles. In everything, he manifests a great trust in Providence and practices the pardon of sins. In 1789, an assembly of all the representatives of the French society is summoned to Versailles by the king. They are the General States. From here, the power changes hands. Attempts are made to limit, then overthrow monarchy. Massacres, pillaging and riots occur throughout the realm, though at first quite isolated, but become really important from 1792 to 1796, culminating in the period known as the Terror. In the name of liberty, religious vows were forbidden in 1790, while church property had been confiscated the previous year. The new state wants to control the church by demanding a special oath from the clergy. In 1790, Henriette Aymer is 23 years old. Pierre Coudrin is a year younger. He had received subdiaconate the previous year in the episcopal palace of Poitiers. He is ordained deacon in October 1719 in Angers. The Pope Pius VI condemns the oath, putting an end to the debates raging within the Church of France. The state tracks down the priests who refuse the oath. In June 1791, Pierre is forced to flee Coussay for the first time to go to Saint-Ustre, because he is known to be against the oath, despite the fact he didn't have to take it, as he wasn't a priest yet. In that isolated place, he stays at the house of a non-assermented priest he didn't initially know, Abbot Filatro, and he ponders those events. Back in Coussay at the end of summer, he leaves for Paris at the beginning of the following year, 1792. He must be ordained priest there, because the political unrests hinder any ordination in his region. He directs himself to the Latin neighborhood near the Sorbonne University, behind the Pantheon, a former church desecrated by the Revolution, to reach the Irish College. On the 4th of March 1792, Pierre Coudrin received the sacrament of order from the hands of Monseigneur de Bonald in the library of the place. Priests faithful to Rome could minister there freely. Contrary to what has been stated by Hilarion Lucas in the marble plate commemorating the event, the chapel beneath had not been taken by the revolutionaries. More still, it was continually in use for the faithful's needs, and an ordination ceremony would have hindered that. Upon receiving this consecration, Father Coudrin says he formed the intention of suffering everything, sacrificing himself to the good Lord, and to die if need be at his service. Pierre Coudrin, now father, spent his ordination retreat after the ordination, nearby, at Lombard College on Carm Street. When he returns to Coussay, he is more determined than ever. It is most likely at that altar that he celebrates his first Mass. On the 8th of April, Easter Sunday, the new power summons the parish for the election of its new priest. Pierre pronounces those words and makes him irrevocably choose a side. "Nor I, nor my family will take any part in this act of schism." It is much more than a political siding. It's a confession of faith. That evening, after Vespers, he has to sneak away by the church's back door. Above the sacristy entrance to commemorate that event, Pierre's family offered a painting of the flight to Egypt. He runs across fields and forests. After a few hesitations, he decides to hide at his cousin's place, François Moment, a farmer attached to the castle of La Motte-du-Sault. It is springtime of the year 1792. The place is not safe. The village nearby is rather in favor of the revolutionaries. Pierre and his cousin, after having stayed a few days, simulate a departure and come back at night. Pierre will settle in the granary. Climbing up a ladder through a trapdoor, he discovers a narrow corridor 5 meters by 2 and 1.5 meters high. Impossible to stand up. He stays in that tiny place for about 6 months, until October. Unable to wash and scarcely eating, he can climb down by midnight to celebrate Mass in the room below, since then transformed into an oratory. At times, he can exercise a bit and see his cousin, but has to remain extremely cautious. During the day, he prays before the corporal he used at Mass, believing he still had a few particles of consecrated hosts remaining. The rest of the time, he reads the history of church. One time in September, while practicing the adoration still perpetuated in the congregation, the young priest receives the intellectual vision of what he is called to establish. Men in white proclaiming the gospel as far as the horizon goes, assisted by women praying and providing material means. The next month, probably still affected by that contemplation, the reading of the life of Saint Capret during the breviary sets out the fire in his heart. That bishop, who lived during the great persecution of Diocletian during the first centuries of the Church, had also gone into hiding. Upon seeing the martyr of Saint Foy, a teenage girl, he decided to leave his hiding place and receive the crown of martyrdom. No more is needed for Pierre. He had received a calling. He now perceives he is being sent. It was on the 20th of October 1792. Near the house, he vows to give himself to the mission until death if need be, and knowing in his heart he would always be safe. An oak tree now lost is his witness. He immediately speeds to Coucy, and he rapidly leaves. The Lord is taking him by the hand towards Poitiers for him to deploy his plan of salvation.